Welcome to the Business Uninterrupted podcast. Today we're talking about how AI is changing cyber risk, not by breaking controls, but by exploiting spaces between them. And with us today, we have John Marler, Director of Product Management and Cybersecurity Evangelist. Welcome, John. Yeah, let's dig into it. So our first question, in the blog, you challenge the idea that strong security controls automatically mean a secure environment. What's one belief you still see CISOs holding on to that no longer reflects how attacks actually happen today?
Great question. What I would say that the one belief that's no longer reflecting how attacks really happen is this belief that because you bought the best controls, you have them implemented well, everything looks green, that everything is secure. In other words, a green dashboard means everything's good, we're fine. And, for like 20 years, that's basically how it worked. You harden the individual controls, we got better tools, better firewalls, and all of that added together means that you're protected against commodity attacks. If you're not blocking like 99% of what comes at you, you're in a good shot, right? Or you're in good shape. The reason that is no longer true is because AI is making it to where the AI can probe your defenses and find the space in between those controls. Basically, with AI, they get a near infinite amount of retries, and it's very difficult to deal with that because every attack is unique. And when CISOs look at their environment, they look at their tools, they say, well, the email system looks fine, EDR looks fine, everything looks green, and we don't understand what's going on here. It's those little spaces in between those tools where AI really shines and where AI can fit in.
So you outlined 3 major gaps in the blog. Which one do you think organizations are underestimating the most right now?
I would say that's the identity versus authenticity. And really, the reason for that is they've deployed a lot of controls. We have multi-factor authentication, we have zero trust, we have all of those types of things in place, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you verified the identity that you have trusted intent. And what I mean by that is, the trusted intent is what is the intention behind that verified identity and what are they trying to do? And that is where the AI tools really shine, is in breaking that intent, that trusted intent. And because of that, it makes it very challenging because the CISOs, again, look at the screen, they say everything's green, it's fine. But just like what happened with the RUP attack with the $25 million wire transfer, everything looked perfect. But because it was, we had a real face, we had a real voice, everything seemed fine. But in reality, that was a deep fake, and it cost them.
Yep. So you described the QR code example. Can you walk me through where, step by step, the organization loses visibility?
Yeah, see, this is a really creative one, and this is very interesting because the interesting thing about it is all of the tools work individually. What happens in a Quishing attack is the victim or the target receives a QR code with a very specially crafted email written by AI, and the way that AI writes these emails now makes it very difficult to identify. In traditional phishing, we could look at the phishing emails and say, okay, well, this is what they're asking for, write a signature, we put it in place, we block all of them. With AI attacks, everything's unique. So there's no magic signature that'll catch it all. With the Quishing attack, the first problem is they receive a QR code. And QR codes are used for a lot of things now. They're used for payments, they're used for all sorts of things, and people are used to seeing QR codes. So in this case, they think back to their security training and they go, well, they're not asking me to click a link. I know I'm not supposed to click links. I've been to my security training. I know that. But this is a QR code, and QR codes are safe, right? Not realizing, well, QR code is, at the end of the day, it's just a link. So they scan the QR code with their personal phone. And a lot of organizations have shifted things in a way that personal phones are not managed. I mean, they never, even if you're on a corporate phone, a lot of times the way that IT departments are managing those is they're putting all of the sensitive data inside a sandbox and saying, well, we've protected our data in a sandbox, so we're fine there because they're only accessing the device. And what they're thinking about is protecting the data inside the device from compromise if the phone is lost, but they're not thinking, what are the other attacks that could happen on a personal device? So what happens when they scan that QR code is now the attack has shifted from all corporate managed assets to a personal device. And basically that is what we would call a boundary crossing. So now you've crossed from the very secure corporate managed environment into the personal environment. And then the QR code takes them to a login page. And it looks exactly like their regular login page, but it's actually an attack. And that login page is using various techniques to capture the user's login, and in some cases even capture their multi-factor authentication. So the user puts in their real credentials, they complete their MFA, and the tool captures all this information in real time. So from the system that's monitoring logins perspective, this was legitimate login. They use real credentials, they pass the MFA, everything looks fine. And now the attacker has what we would call a session token. They have the ability to basically act as that user because they've captured it. And to all of the systems that are monitoring, everything looks totally legitimate. The email looked legitimate, the login looked legitimate, everything seems fine. And really what has happened is now that person has given the attacker access into the system, and now they have a foothold. And that's where everything is broken down. And it's not a failure of the controls, it's a boundary failure. What has happened is you've crossed a boundary outside of the protected enclave into the personal realm, and the attack won in basically an unmanaged space that none of the corporate security controls can see.
So you mentioned that AI isn't making attacks more sophisticated, it's making them more effective. What do you mean by that?
Great question. So sophisticated typically means technically complex. So that means things like developing new exploits, finding what we would call a 0-day or an exploit that hasn't been published yet, writing custom malware. And, we've seen those types of attacks for a very long time. But those attacks are expensive, they take time, and that's not what's actually causing most of the breaches, right? In a traditional phishing attack, you'd write one template, blast it out to a lot of people, and then, if you send out 1 million of them, you get 10 basis points of responses. That's pretty good, right? With AI, when AI writes the emails, they're all unique. And what we're seeing is the click-through rates on AI-generated emails are about 54% compared to 12% for traditional human-crafted campaigns. And the thing is, they're not more technically sophisticated. It's just better because they're unique and they're better at passing human heuristics. What AI models that we use today, what people think of when they think AI, they think Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. They're large, what we call them technically are large language models. They're built to understand human language. And because of that understanding of human language, they can create emails that are unique, that sound like a target's tone. They can look very much like the types of emails that they're expecting. And so rather than being technically sophisticated, they're more effective because they can customize and they can look unique and sound like what they would expect to hear that would make that target think, oh, I need to act on this right now because it's urgent. And they've passed all of what I think of my heuristic checks, what I go through when I think all back to my cybersecurity training. They've passed all of that. And this is very easy for attackers now because the AI tools can automate this. So you don't have to be a genius in writing emails. You just have to know how to successfully prompt it.
So that kind of goes into my next question. In the blog, you push back on the idea that users are the weakest link. So what's actually breaking down if it's not the user?
Right. And, we say that a lot of times and we blame people because they've acted rationally, right? Like if it looks legitimate, it comes from the right person, it sounds right, maybe it even uses colloquial language that we only use inside our organization. And it references real projects. That sounds normal. That sounds rational. And we can't take every single email that we get a day and load it into some kind of special system to verify the authenticity of who exactly sent it. When you think about things like this, the AI is not going to make mistakes. The AI is not going to misspell things. It's not going to sound like a bad translation from one language to the other. It's not going to do that. And it's also not going to take breaks, and it's not going to pause. AI can send messages faster than anything can really deal with it, right? The problem is a flaw in how we built our security architecture. There's not an awareness gap. The problem is that the AI is so fast and so effective that you can't expect the humans to be able to determine what that looks like, and you have to be better. So there's ways to deal with that. But the problem is we're trained to think, well, phishing messages are going to be sloppy. Maybe they'll be written with broken English. The images will look weird or grainy or whatever. AI doesn't make those mistakes. It knows that, and it's going to avoid all of that. It may sound more real than the emails you get from your colleagues. And the emails you get from your colleagues, they may be running them through LLMs to make sure they're not, they sound more professional or they've adjusted tone. So the emails you're receiving, legitimate, that aren't actual attacks, are also probably being written or at least edited by AI, which makes it even harder to tell AI messages apart from real messages.
They talk about how traditional detection models miss these attacks. Is the issue the tools themselves or how they're designed to operate?
Great question. And I think for me, the tools are typically good on their own. We've become very good at identifying what we know is a bad attack. We've implemented MFA and a lot of times zero trust, and the tools work. And these attacks aren't working because they defeated the tool. The reason that they work is because they've found gaps in the process. So if you think back to like the Quishing attack, where you have an email to a personal phone to a fake login, which creates a legitimate session, nothing in that scenario looks bad to a traditional tool. Every single tool in that has a clean event. There weren't thousands of failed logins. There weren't thousands of IP addresses. There wasn't any known bad actor. Everything looked normal. And they were really, these attack scenarios and these defense systems were written for a world where attacks happen within a single domain of control. So for instance, a massive attack on the server where they're just trying random passwords, or they're using credential stuffing and they have a database of known passwords and they're trying to attack it. Like, those types of attacks are designed for a single target, not a chain of we're going to do this, and this, and that looks like a specific attack. And that's not a failure in those individual tools. It's a failure in the visibility over all those tools and be able to analyze all those events to basically identify a risky chain of events.
Now, you introduced the idea of narrative detection. What does that actually look like in practice?
So the narrative detection is really what I was describing there. A narrative is, instead of focusing on, we're just looking for an attack in one place, looking at the story, if you will. A narrative is just a story, right? So the story, like the story of the attack of, well, I got the email, no, I scanned it with my phone, those types of things, where every little piece of that story looks good by itself, but when you look at it all together, it makes more sense that this is actually something bad that happened. And that correlation has to be behavioral, not just known bad actors and timestamps and those types of things. The traditional way we detect these things. And this is a big challenge, right? Most enterprises haven't implemented the kinds of tools that can monitor multiple different access controls and build those narratives, much less look at a narrative and say, this is actually a potentially malicious narrative. It goes from, you switch from, is this one thing malicious, to these all things that happened in sequence, is that potentially malicious, or does that indicate that something necessarily bad happened?
Now, you mentioned that too much control can push users to work around systems. How should organizations think about that trade-off?
It's a great question because, a lot of times when we're thinking about individual controls, let's say passwords, for example, with the password, we've gone from saying, well, you have to set your password, it has to be 8 characters, and we're going to do it every 30 days, to now it's every 2 weeks, it's got to be 12 characters, and you've got to authenticate with your phone and your email. We've got 2 MFAs. The problem with creating this level of friction is, if you create too much friction, people will just stop using the tools. You make it so hard to use, say, for example, Teams, which most organizations have from Office 365. If you make Teams so hard to use, someone will go set up a Slack channel and they'll start using Slack, and you won't even know about it. And if they have to, they'll put it on their personal phone, or they'll just start using it there. Or they'll say, well, you know what, I use WhatsApp with my friends. I'll just use my WhatsApp and say, hey, dude, do you have WhatsApp? Let me send you something. I can't work with Teams. Teams is just being, it won't let me attach things, or it's giving me grief about it. So I'm just gonna bypass that. And this isn't a new problem. This has been a problem for a long time. But the reason I bring it up is, a lot of times the natural reaction when they think about these scenario-based attacks is, rather than looking at those scenarios, because that's hard, they think, well, let's tackle the low-hanging fruit and do something simple, because we have to do something right now. And we'll just make the controls tighter and lock down what people can do on these tools. The reality is, if you lock things down too hard, people are just going to find ways to work around it, and then you lose all visibility. Like squishing something in your fist. The more you squeeze, the more it's going to slip between your fingers.
So if organizations don't address these gaps, where does the impact show up first from a business perspective?
Financial fraud's the biggest impact. That's what you'll see first. That ARP case was a big one. That's $25 million in a single incident. In 2024, the global phishing losses were about $17.5 billion, and that was up 45%. And it's gonna go up again, right? The U.S. financial fraud losses are at $12.5 billion in 2025, and that's where you're going to see the majority of the impact. Is they're going to start hitting your financial sector, your financial divisions, whether it's a large $25 million transfer, or it's 10, 12, 20 smaller transfers that add up to $25 million. We've been seeing stories about that, where some organizations are so efficient at paying invoices. The trick is to figure out how to get an invoice into accounts payable and get a wire transfer out that way. And this is something that AI is very good at, because it can try 1,000 times. The second place I would say is regulatory. And what I mean by that is the standards are going to get tougher, and they're going to add more controls. PCI DSS is already moving in that area. They're shifting from do you have the controls and to are the controls actually protecting you in practice, and that's a big shift in that area. We're starting to see government regulations that are coming into play here, and that's going to increase cost. That's going to slow down movement in those sectors, slow down development as you deal with these types of changes. Instead of building features for your clients, you're going to be building features to meet new compliance schemes. So there's going to be that. And I would say, finally, there's a big erosion of internal trust. If you hear about all this stuff happening and you hear about deepfakes and all this stuff, that's going to erode trust. And when you try to do things inside your organizations, people are going to say, is that really him? Is that a deep fake? I don't know. Maybe I should find another way to verify this. And that can slow things down. And it makes people uneasy, and it makes people unwilling to be cooperative and work. And that can really slow things down, and it can hurt morale too. So that may not exactly show up as like a quantifiable dollar number. But you can feel it when you interact with people, and you can tell what's happening when things slow down. So I'd say, the impact's going to show up in your bank account first, and then it'll show up in how fast you can respond to the things and make decisions, because people aren't going to trust things anymore.
Right. Well, I've got one last question for you. So if you could give CISOs one directive for the next 12 months based on this, what would it be?
I would say if I was going to suggest one directive for CISOs in the next months, I would say map the boundaries between your controls, not just the controls themselves. Most CISOs can tell you exactly what their email gateway does, what their EDR does, what all these individual controls do. But not a lot of them can tell you what happens in the handoff between those systems. When a user transitions from a managed device to an unmanaged one, how does that happen? What happens when the user does that? Does the workflow jump from one security domain to another? Is there a boundary crossing that any of the tools aren't matching? Those are the types of things that the AI systems are designed to exploit. They look for those gaps in the boundaries, and they probe for them, and they exploit them. And it's not a matter of buying a new tool. It's a matter of looking at the environment differently, thinking about your highest risk workflows, things like wire transfers, privilege access changes, changes or access to sensitive data. You really have to think, where are all the points in the workflow where an attack across from a domain I monitor to one I don't? Moving from my laptop that's managed by IT and I've got every security control possible loaded on it, to my iPhone that has none of them. That's really where you'll start to identify where your gaps are, and then you can start thinking about, okay, well, how do we start instrumenting those boundaries so we can measure when that happens, and then start building out those stories or those narratives, and start monitoring for those narratives where things cross. I'm not saying stop auditing your controls, but what I'm saying is to start auditing the spaces between them, because that's where you're going to lose. That's where the attacks are going to slip through, is between those controls.
This has been great, and I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.